I don't know how to check that it's recording. Okay.
Oh, it's
recording.
Awesome. So, whoop. All right. Hello, my name is Sydney. I'm here with Vince, Juliana, and Stephanie. And we are addressing the My Ántonia discussion today. So our prompt is prompt number 5, I believe. It is discuss Cather's portrayal of the frontier, its land, and its people. Compare and contrast these perceptions with her conclusions regarding the town and people of Black Hawk. Discuss how Jim views the hired girls he encounters there. In his assessment of the townspeople, is the assessment of the townspeople sincere or ironic? So, to start out our discussion, we're going to be breaking it down a little bit just so we can focus. We're going to be discussing Cather's portrayal of the frontier, its land, and its people. So I know in what I was researching about the frontier, it was very homespun ethics, a lot of like stereotypes, a lot of you can do this but not this. So what do you guys think about that?
For me, I feel like there's 2 different portrayals of frontier people. So you have like the native borns, and then you have the people who migrated there, and it's like 2 completely different worlds. So one of them is like very to their roots, and like you said, it's this and just that. You can't like go out of your way and like do something that's not like the normal. And then you have the immigrants who are like from a completely different place. They have their own like morals or things that go base their the way they live off. It's like 2 completely different worlds.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Juliana, in the aspect of like immigrant like survival instincts are a lot more different than other people who have grown up in a frontier land like their whole entire lives. Let's say if you're migrating onto that land, you have all these different traditions and cultural customs in which you're used to following from your native land. So I thought that was really interesting in how Cather portrayed that through the book of My Ántonia. We could notice how Ántonia and her family, they're Bohemian, so they would clearly talk in their own language, and there was that language barrier in between frontierland who migrated there and then those who were already living there. So let's say Jim's family, they kind of viewed Ántonia and her family. They didn't view them like harshly, but there were other neighbors who viewed them as, oh, that family or the Bohemian family. And no one else really wanted to talk to them and really get to know them and their different traditions and cultures. So I thought that was really interesting.
And this said about the Norwegians and the Russians and the Austrians there too. Sorry, Vince, I didn't mean to cut you off.
It's all right. Yeah, I agree with you guys too, and I think Cather also portrays a really good point. The struggles that these immigrants had to face. Like, I remember reading a part where Peter, I think his name was, like the Russian group, when they experienced some like terrible things when they came over here, and um I remember too that I forget what the family was, Jim's family, or it was the Shimerdas, one of them. When they came to the farm, when they migrated there, they sort of got swindled because they were sold a farm which is not used to the Nebraska farmlands and this sort of thing.
Yeah, immigrants are taken advantage of in that way because they're supposed to work, they're supposed to survive, they're supposed to work hard and take advantage of their land, but they're not given adequate land, they're not given adequate property, stuff like that. And when we're talking about Black Hawk, yeah, it's fake, but it's like also based on not only Cather's experiences, but experiences of immigrants at the time. And a lot of people coming, like Pavel and Peter, the Russians, and like all the other people just trying to make their lives better. I know like Otto, he worked with the Burdens, and then he kind of just said, this isn't for me anymore. And they never heard from him again. So immigrants are really left chasing opportunity and not given like the height of the opportunity. So I think that is a prominent feature of frontier life for immigrants, at least.
Yeah, I feel like it was important to, as like what you just said, Sydney, to follow up on that. I can kind of see that through Antonia's father, like Mr. Shermada. Like he felt unhappy, which is why he decided to take that decision. And
Yeah.
it wasn't long after that they were living there. Like they had just moved over to Blackhawk at that time, or the, you know, in like the
Yeah,
frontier
it
land.
was in the winter time, and they
Yeah,
summer, I think.
yeah.
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 So I
And
thought it was very, sorry, I just thought it was like really sad how they had come over there to experience and to have more opportunities in that different land and whatnot. And then ultimately, he just either felt homesick and just didn't really feel happy there anymore.
Yeah.
like for him, the reason that he moved was because like for his older son and then like for his wife because she kept going on about how there was better life in America, like there was more opportunities, like it was better for them, like they could prosper more. But like he was never really full for it. So once he was here, like yeah, he was like showing a happy, like brave face for like his family, but like deep down, it wasn't really for him. So I feel like once the winter hit, that was like his breaking point.
Yeah.
I think the fact that we're on a frontier, not in a city, makes a big difference in that, because immigrants on the frontier are left with their own land. They're left to just make do with what they have and with what others will sell them and buy from them. And so we can get into talking about like the generational gap where Antonia remembers her homeland. She remembers like the flowers, and she sees the same flowers in Nebraska. And she says, these were in my homeland, you know? And she like remembers her father playing music, but her father won't play music anymore because that's not his homeland. Whereas Antonia is kind of in that bridge. And both are left just on this frontier, just trying to make do. So we can get into stereotypes that she went against, and what I would imagine a lot of immigrant women would have gone against just to make ends meet. But it was almost expected by her family to work hard, but expected by the townspeople to be a lady and not exercise, not show her muscles, wear a hat, you know, like it. So she's kind of in this distortion, or this, she has this dissonance in her life, which I would imagine was true for a lot of immigrants on the frontier, just because of the hard work they had to do.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Do we have anything else to add on this point?
No, I think we covered it.
All right. So our next point is compare and contrast these perceptions with her conclusions regarding the town and the people of Blackhawk. We discussed earlier this week what 3 perceptions we might want to focus on, because there's so many, including but not limited to the ones we just discussed, right? So the first perception that we wanted to talk about was how Jim viewed the town's girls versus the hired girls, and like the distortion in his eyes and other people's eyes. So, what do you guys think about that?
Personally, I thought Jim viewed the hired girls because hired girls were like Lena. They consisted of Lena, Antonia, what were they called? The Mary.
Antonia, Lena, Tiny, the 3 Bohemian Marys, and there was someone else too, but she was like a minor character. I don't remember her
Yeah,
name.
I remember there was someone else as well. I think her name was
Oh, Anna. Anna.
Anna.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting how he viewed them versus the town girls, specifically because hired girls, they were, as we just mentioned, were like immigrants, and they had different, as I've mentioned, like customs and culture and traditions, and it was odd, not odd, but it was interesting in seeing how they were adapting to their environment compared to towns girls who were a bit more like, how do I say this but not in a rude way, how they were a bit
Honestly,
more
they were exactly how their mothers were, and their kids, their daughters will be the exact same way.
exactly.
There's no
So
change, there's no adaptation like you were talking about.
yeah, they were just, it's in a sense, it's like towns girls were like, well, this is black and white and this is how it's always been. So I'm always going to do it in this specific way. And everyone else who is like me, who's a female, should also follow this same path that I've been taught. Meanwhile, the hired girls, they've been adapting, they've been trying their best to adapt and like do their job and do their work and things like that. As with the towns girls, it's like, no, you shouldn't work, you need to be home with your family, you need to stay inside, you can't wear promiscuous clothing as the hired girls did, which was just ridiculous in my eyes. But yeah, that's my take.
And hounds girls couldn't be taken advantage of like hired girls
Mhm.
could be. Like whether that's sexual, whether that's labor wise, it didn't matter. Like hired girls were seen as below towns girls, but not for Jim. Because I think we can address that in the beginning at least, Jim was a kind of immigrant in Black Hawk. Like he had roots there, so wasn't fully immersed in that experience. But we can see him being like, I don't like any of these people. Like I don't relate to any of these people. And he ends up teaching Antonia, right? He like relates to her. And I think what's amazing is how in love he fell with the hired girls. He was absolutely infatuated with them. And to the point where he was almost disgusted with the town's girls. He was like, they're lethargic, they're apathetic, they have no passion, they have no drive, they're fat. Like, I don't like these people because they represent things that are opposite of everything that he's experienced. He he says they don't work hard, so they're lazy, right? He's like, whether it's fair or not, those were his experiences, and that's what I like that about Jim, that he was honest in his portrayal of what he saw around him, even if it wasn't a true account of the world around him. um yeah, I like how he saw that he put value in the hired girls. He really saw their
He was,
go
he
ahead.
was like really infatuated with like their free spirit, like their will to just do whatever they wanted and not like be condemned to just how people wanted them to be. So like they were their own persons, they did their own things, and then I feel like that's what really like hooked him. However, like they did their own thing and they didn't care what anybody else said, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think an important factor too, you mentioned free spirit. I think it's familiarity as well. Jim lived with some of these people for like a long time, especially Antonia. They live in the farms, in the prairie lands, and like you said, they did whatever they want. They went exploring in nature, and I think that plays a really important part when they move into the town as well.
Exactly. And it highlights what the beauty he saw in what the frontier was. He acknowledged that people work hard. He saw Antonia and her family sweating, breaking their backs, but also being really strong. And then he saw that that strength inspired what you were saying, that free spirit, and that they didn't forget where they came from either. So that's an integral part of what the frontier experience was, at least from an immigrant perspective, in Jim's eyes. So, yeah. So our next point is a struggle in the immigrant experience versus privilege and the business people. So what do you guys think about that?
Personally, their experience was completely different, right? So immigrant people, like as I've mentioned, they had to adapt to this whole new environment as to which they need to succeed. They need to, help their family grow and get their education and just be able to maintain a good life to the point that they'll have, at the end of the day, they'll have a meal. They'll have, at the end of the day, they have a job, like a stable job. As with like the privileged and business people, was all about kind of, how can in a way, it was all about their status in the town, and aside from that, it was like, oh, well, who else has this property? Who else? Like, it's more business like of like, oh, okay, well, what am I getting in return? As with immigrants, it was more like, how can I help my family do better so that they won't have to struggle as I am,
Yeah.
which is I can personally kind of relate to that with my family because it's always we need to work hard to be able to prosper in this country and land. So I feel like that's how they must have felt. As with the privileged and business people, they grew up there, they knew it like the back of their hand. They already had connections like through their family. So it's more so of following this legacy rather than really venturing out and having to overcome these obstacles.
So you're talking about like thriving versus surviving, basically.
Yeah, basically.
That was
Like,
really true.
Yeah, and I just wanna, oh,
I, oh, you go.
just to add real quick, even the names, hired girls, that means they had to work for it, and that's like an important difference. They had to struggle, whereas, as you mentioned, the business people, they're there to earn money to thrive even more than they already are.
Like for like you said, like the hired girls, they went into town to work to be able to support their family because their family needed like extra help, extra money, and they saw the opportunity that like with the business people, like if you like work with them, you earn a little bit more. But it also sucked because like in many ways they were taken advantage of, and like it always ended up getting the short end of the stick because the business people were like they were like they saw how like inexperienced, how like naive they were, so they were like, okay, so we'll do whatever, and they'll do the work because they need it.
Yeah.
But like it sucked how like they were taken advantage of in that sort of way.
Yeah. It's almost like there's this cognitive recognition of like, I, if I'm quote native to a place like Black Hawk, if I'm white and in good social standing, not an immigrant, and I'm living in Black Hawk, I'm a business person, let's say businessman for this argument's sake, I know that my uh, grandfather, great grandfather had to work hard to be where I'm at today because towns like these didn't always exist. And I see there's exterior prairie lands that are existing, which in one way or another, people in the town did rely on for produce, for um, livestock, milk, eggs, stuff like that. Um, and so it's undeniable that these immigrants are part of the town, but they are seen as subpar because they are starting in a place which is seen as old. They're so like you were saying, they're easy to take advantage of because they're just starting out. They're trying to do their best. There's a quote of this recognition. I think it's in book 1 and it's chapter 19, I think. No, it's in it's book 1, chapter 19. It says, if I live here like you, that is different. Things will be easy for you, but they will be hard for us. That's when Antonia was talking to Jim. Jim is like, he sees that his grandfather's successful. He sees the people around him are successful. He doesn't like connect the two. Whereas Antonia, from a really young age, had to work hard, like you guys were saying, had to support her family. She went to town to support her family. So it's like almost just a given at that point that that was going to be the way of life. Whether that's right or wrong didn't seem to matter much because that's the way that the frontier was thriving as a whole. So yeah, so in that
And
what, Vince?
but I really like that quote too because it was Antonia saying this to Jim, and it makes it seem like there's a difference between the two, right? You have Antonia who's struggling, and Jim, he's moving into a different path, a separate path from her own. And I think we get to see that a little bit more about the ironic or not ironic assessment.
And yeah, I like how you're connecting the two. It's almost like Jim sees it, he's trying to understand it, but he's never experienced it, and he can't connect it to his own experiences. Like he lost his parents, he can relate to Antonia in that she lost her dad. He is kind of an outcast. He's bullied by the boys at his school because he wants to hang out with the hired girls, but he's not one of them either. So I think that's ironic, like you said. I appreciate that point of view. That was really good, Vince. um, Juliana, did you have something to say?
Oh, no, I already said what I had to say.
Okay.
Yeah.
So last point on this page was country folk versus town folk and their respective relationship to the land. We were talking about that kind of in farmland and prairie land versus actual proper town earlier this week. So what do you guys think about that?
Actually, this portion actually is one of my favorite sections.
This is all you, Vince, huh?
Cather, in her novel, she plays heavily on this relationship between the land and its people, the environment and its people. And I think the biggest difference between the country folk and the townsfolk is that country folk who lives in the prairies and the farms, like Antonia and even Jim, who lived there for some time, they have a very strong connection to the environment. We have like Jim, who like when he was in his grandparents' farm, he often spent a lot of time in nature and in the environment, even like thinking of them as human beings. I remember reading, I don't know the specific quote, but I have a paraphrase. When he was worrying about the scarcity of the trees in his area and the prairies, he would visit them as if they were people. Like he was worried they're going to be sick or something like that. I think this just shows his compassion for nature.
Yeah, he really relates it to himself. Even in his adulthood, when he's kind of being nostalgic and he's remembering, he's kind of equating his relationship to the people, the prairie, the immigrants, his experiences to the beauty of the prairie. He never neglects that recognition. And I don't think a lot of the townsfolk did that. But they also didn't have the same experiences as Jim or the hired girls, right? All right. Good point. So our next point is discuss how Jim views the hired girls he encounters there. So like we said before, the hired girls include Antonia, Lena, Tiny, the three Bohemian Marys, and also Anna, which we left off of this list by accident. But there's a lot of them in the town, to be honest. So we can start with Antonia if you guys like. Yeah, he's in love with this girl. He absolutely, like, there's no other way to put it. Whether you want to say it's romantic, platonic, sexual, not, he is infatuated with her. And it connects to his infatuation with the prairie and the frontier. That's my just clear-cut assessment of Antonia in Jim's life, not as an individual, but yeah. What do you guys think?
And I feel like he mentions it in the book too, that he's like in love with her. Like he doesn't like say in what way or like shape, form, but he just says that he's in love with her.
Yeah.
Like we don't know like if it's her as like her or like her as like her personality and how she is.
I think
So,
it's like, almost.
Yeah.
Yeah. What were you gonna say?
So I have a really interesting quote that I read from the book, which I wrote down. It says, so Jim was telling Antonia, quote unquote, the idea of you is part of my mind. End quote. He ends up saying, you influence my likes and dislikes, all my tastes, hundreds of times when I don't realize it. You really are a part of me. In a way, the way I interpret it is that she could be his friend, his girlfriend, his mother, his sister, anything that she could possibly be to him, and he'll still love her no matter what. He'll still have love for her no matter what. So that's what I really captured from how Jim viewed Antonia, that regardless of the situation, of everything that they've been through, all the experiences that they've lived with one another, along with the hardships, they have always been there for one another, even through the rough times, and that no matter what, he'll still have that love for her.
Exactly. And I think for Antonia, it's most prominent, but I think the same can be said for all of the hired girls. Because, like, when Antonia becomes pregnant, he expresses he's disappointed in her. He can't believe she's done this. He almost as if she was on a pedestal and she fell off, and he just can't believe she fell off. But he still sees her on a pedestal. He sees, like, Lena and Tiny never got married. They were business women. And he still looked up to them. He still saw them as like these works of art almost. And like I was reading an analysis actually when it was talking about Lena, And have you guys read The Odyssey by Homer? It connected her to Circe, the nymph from it, as being kind of lustrous and ambitious. And I was like, that's a great analysis because like her whole thing in life, in book one, she says, I never want to get married. I never want to have kids. That's not what I want. In the second to last book, she says, I'm never getting married. I don't want kids. That's not what I want. She's so determined. And he's like, don't get it, but I respect it. So it's almost as if we have this unprecedented level of understanding and empathy for another person that we don't see in the country people, we don't see even in the frontier people, but in Jim's relationship with the hired girls and how he views them, we definitely do see. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off or like go past Ántonia, but what else are you guys thinking?
Well, for Lena, I would say that she's always been a flirt, like throughout the whole entire book. They've always seen her as a flirt. Even when Ántonia, she was very cold towards her when Lena came over. She had like her gloves and whatnot. And then they all asked like, well, oh, why did you react like that towards her? She's like, well, she has a really different history back from where we were, like where we were all living with together and whatnot. So I thought it was interesting how Jim viewed her, especially with the type of history that decided to grow over time. For Ántonia, he reflects basically like her child, his childhood with her. As with Lena, it's more so like their teenage years, their younger adulthood experience and memories with one another, especially with like what they had, like it was like kind of on again, off again, to the point where it started affecting his studies, which is really interesting.
Yeah, it's almost like he reverted back to that pre-adolescent mindset because of who he was around. He relates his adolescence and his childhood with these girls, or eventual women, I should say.
Yeah.
Like with Lena, like the whole thing around her was like everybody would like talk about her, good or bad, it didn't matter. But to her, she was always like whatever about the situation. Like it never like made her like, I don't know how to like explain it, but she was always like they could talk, like it doesn't matter. Like whether I did it or I didn't do it, it's like
it is what it is, basically.
Yeah, it is what it is.
Yeah. I'm gonna pause the recording because it looks like we lost Vince, so we'll be right back. Make sure. All right, we are back. So sorry. So before we move on to the next point, we're going to discuss a few quotes that we have regarding the hired girls, and we feel like they represent not only the true place which they held in their social standings, but also how Jim viewed them. Juliana, would you like to go first?
Yeah. So I have this quote. I believe it's from the second part in the book, where he's like talking about them and like describing them, like how he viewed the hired girls. And then there's the quote like begins, handsome girls have the fresh color of their country upbringing, and in their eyes a brilliancy which is called by no metaphor, alas, the light of youth. So like basically he's describing them as like this rays of sunshine, just full of life, full of youth, how like that's how he viewed them and like nothing else, not how like the people from Black Hawk viewed them. Like that was his own like, because he like was with them, he like I don't know how to say it, but like he was friends with them basically, and he like saw them for who they were and how they were, not how like everybody else was speaking on them or like describing them.
Exactly. He saw them as individuals and who had value in their culture and their past. And I think it's really interesting that he was so different from everyone else around him because of that. Yeah, I like that quote. He's such a romantic. When the book progressed and they were like, oh, he's a lawyer now, I was like, no way. no way, he has to be a writer. He has to be like some fantastic novelist or poet who talks about love and nature and beauty of things. No, he was a lawyer. And I think he must have been good at it, but the way he talks about these young women is just incredible almost. He's so in love with them. And I like your quote. I like how it brought out like this fantastical vernacular that he had in describing these girls and the landscape, but really nothing else. He didn't even describe his wife that way towards the end of the book. Like he has such this deep-rooted love for his childhood and the people who made his childhood special. It is just unprecedented. My quote is from book 2. I was really interested in how Jim was different, but not exactly like his peers and not exactly like the hired girls at the same time. And I was interested in the hired girls' experiences, and it's Jim. It's his words. He says, "If I told my schoolmates that Lena Lingard's grandfather was a clergyman and was much respected in Norway, they looked at me blankly. What did it matter? All foreigners were ignorant people who couldn't speak English." And so he's kind of coming into this maturity of recognizing that not everyone sees these beautiful, inspiring, passionate women like I do. And he's kind of equating that with the frontier mentality of, like we said before, that homespun ethics, those deeply rooted, this is right, this is wrong, this is the only way to do it. He said, she said, doesn't matter, like that kind of thing. And so I thought that was interesting. I didn't know if you guys had anything else to say on that.
Oh, sorry.
No, you can go ahead.
Oh, okay. To add on to that, I had one last quote that when Jim was talking about Lena.
Yeah.
He said, quote unquote, to dance Home Sweet Home with Lena was like coming with the tide. So to add on to that, he just felt so happy and filled with joy whenever he was talking to any of them.
Yeah.
More specifically, Lena and Ántonia, because he was closest with both of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and to to add on to all of that, it just shows how fond he was of these hired girls, and I think in the end, especially Ántonia. I feel like there was a sort of feelings of loneliness he felt because he wasn't really a part of the hired girls or the country folk, and he was just stuck in this middle. I remember there's a portion, I don't know what the quote was, but another paraphrase, he was looking towards the sunset, and I think this really shows his romantic side. He sees this, like, very pretty, and then flying by was this plow. I don't remember what it's called, but it was like a lone bird in the sky in this sunset, and I think that's how he felt. That embodies him, and that plays a really important role because he was just really fond of these girls, and in the end he wasn't able to be with any of them.
Yeah. He, like, I remember there's a quote where he's like, I would have loved it if I could have married any one of them. And it's almost like, well, he wants this kind of person, not necessarily these individuals. So he's kind of like debating against himself, or oh God, I can't remember the word, but he's kind of like going against what he said in the past. He like appreciates these individuals. He loves their experiences, but he still feels like that lonely person wants to be part of that crowd. So he's kind of adapting to what is being told to him by the townspeople. He's saying, this is the kind of person you have to be. You have to be a good man. You have to go out and get a good job, go to school, get married, stuff like that. So you can really see a conflict in him. And Vince, I know what Pastor's talking about. I think it's in the end of book 2 before he goes off to college. And I just love how much like romantic imagery and personification is in this novel. It's just gorgeous, I think. So thank you for including that. Anything else on this topic?
Nope, I think we're good.
So our last topic is his assessment, Jim's assessment of the townspeople sincere or ironic? And Vince, you mentioned irony before. I put the definitions here just for background information for whoever's watching. So the sincerity versus the irony is, I think, very subtle in this novel. I think this is a great question for discussion. And I have my opinions, but what do you guys think?
Well, personally, I thought it was sincere. Townspeople, as in the rest, we're talking about like hired girls or like the townspeople who were like.
I think we're talking about more specifically his assessment of the townspeople, but we could also discuss his assessment of the hired girls and his experiences with both of them, how they intermingled.
Okay, so I feel like as we've like brushed up on this topic as how even though he was very close to the hired girls, he was also part of this like other I guess not other community, but he was raised differently from how they were raised. So he was always like in the middle, like this in between. Right. So I think it would be kind of, in my opinion, I thought it would be kind of sincere as to how he thought of them in a way, because there were some aspects in which he could kind of relate to them in a sense. Not more so in which they would like talk or like think badly about others, but in the sense that they grew up similarly. They had like similar cultures and customs and traditions and whatnot. So I thought that was kind of interesting to view. But at points it was kind of ironic as well.
Yeah. I think definitely at times he feels comfortable with townspeople because he has that familiarity and he doesn't have to work as hard, which I know everyone desires that on some level or another, I would argue. And so it must have been hard for him to want something else, but to feel familiar in what the townspeople were giving him. And I think his accounts were so honest, and he showed a full range of emotion and maturity. So everything he recounted was quite honest on his part, which would equate to sincerity for me. Juliana, were you going to say something?
Yeah, how you said, like, basing off his sincerity, I believe that Jin, throughout the entire novel, it was just like, there was points where it was like irony, but I just got off the feeling that he was like sincere about everything. Like he always like spoke his mind. Like when he was retelling everything, it was always like just raw, sincere everything. Like there was nothing like where he was sugarcoating or when he got like in fights with Ántonia, for example, he would say he hated her. It's like he was sincere because if you were sugarcoating it, he was like, "Oh, we had a falling off, blah blah," but like it was all fine in the end. It's like no, like he was like, "I hated her, like I could not stand her,"
Yeah.
and I feel like that's a sincerity that really is like I don't know how to like put it, but like it's just how he is, like a sincere person, and like he was just always like that, basically.
Yeah. It's almost brutal, his honesty, because sometimes you're like,
Yeah.
whoa, I like, did you say that? You just said something else, which would count as irony, but the ironic expressions were sincere. You
I
know?
feel like he's just a very blunt person.
There you go. I like that. Yeah, I would agree with that. Vince, what do you think?
Yeah, I feel like it's a bit of both. He's very honest, he's very sincere in what he says, but at the same time, that creates some irony. Like he kind of he talks bad about the townspeople, like he said, they're lazy, they're this, blah blah blah. But in the end, he kind of becomes one of them, doesn't he? Like he becomes a lawyer. He lives in the town, unlike Antonia, who stays as a country girl, as a farm girl. And it's ironic in how that ended the way it did.
Yeah, it's almost like his expectations and his romanticism hit reality. And you see, like, there was this buildup, and yeah, the buildup would have made a great end of the story, but it wouldn't have been realistic. So his accounts on saying, this is what really happened. This is how the townspeople treated her. This is what I became. And you can compare me to a townsperson, and this is what she became. And you can compare her to what she's always been. She hasn't changed. Like when he goes back and meets her baby, he's like, this is my same Antonia. This is her. And So he was very sincere in that. It would have been very easy to just say, and they lived happily ever after, but it didn't work like that in real life, and it didn't work like that in Jim's account. Moving forward with this, I would actually argue that the way that Jim told his story and the way that he expressed his opinions and his experiences, especially about the townspeople, were very sincere. But the social networks and the social statuses of the people in the town were very ironic. So it was kind of a mix of both. So like there was, I forget her name, I have it here somewhere, but she runs her father's or husband's business and she works in the town. She's a townsperson. And that directly goes against everything the townspeople say about the hired girls. And in what like Cather writes in Jim's experiences, she talks about stereotypes of the submission and the female inferiority complexes, and those are highlighted by the working girls or the hired girls. They are very true and they're sincere accounts, but in what they're expected to do, how they're expected to be as hired girls in the town, make the townspeople almost hypocritical, but it's technically irony. So I thought that was interesting. That's something I wanted to highlight, is their own prejudice is against themselves and the people who they depend on, as being ironic. So if you guys have anything to add, do you?
To add on to something real quick.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting. Like we're going back to like the beginning when Jim moved into town, like in Blackhawk, how he completely just kind of changed how he was. Like he used to be very like not to say sincere, but he used to be very pure in a sense. He used to be very sweet, very kind to one another. And then whenever like when he moved into the town, he started using curse words and he started like running around and just being all like crazy with the rest of the town kids. So I thought it was interesting how easily persuaded he was compared to Antonia when she came to the town. Like sure, she changed, but it's not so she changed herself, she adapted to that environment. As with Jim, it's more so like his whole not personality, but just his tendencies and the things that he would do just kind of switched over whenever he moved to the town.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting to know.
It feels like he didn't really have like a solid standing in who he was until he moved away. And he could look back and miss what he had. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Juliana.
Oh no, you're good. It's like he didn't like how the townspeople were, or like how they acted, or like carried themselves. But eventually, he ended up exactly the same. So like that's ironic in a sense. Like you don't like how they are, but you just end up being exactly how they are.
Yeah, because like when he came back, he was ashamed of Antonia. He didn't even want to see her, which doesn't sound like the young Jim that we were reading about. It sounds like a townsperson. So Jim's like desires and experiences in that are ironic, but the accounts are sincere compared to the townspeople. So it's kind of both, like we were saying, I think. All right, are we good on this topic?
Yep.
Okay, any final thoughts?
Personally, I really like this book. I like learning about different cultures, like Bohemians and Russians and Norwegians, and I thought it was just interesting, this type of take on this immigrant outlook and experience that they had lived. So, and not to mention Jim's point of view to all of this. So that was really nice.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed the novel. It was extremely good. I love how like the author set it up to be like different books, different time periods, like starting off from like the present, going back to the past, like switching it up in between. It was a really well written, really good, and I really like how she made Jim's character, like just him, how he was retelling his childhood and up until like where he was at that point. I thought it was like extremely well written, really good.
I agree. I personally was very impressed and definitely would read the book again just due to the fact that Jim's accounts were so deeply rooted in what he saw and what he felt. He was such an emotional person. It's like he couldn't keep anything in, which is a level of honesty that is uh, kind of rare in novels, especially. You always have like this fatal flaw of a character that's like can't, and you have like this dissolution between like what actually happened in the story and what the character is telling you. And so the fact that we were kind of living in Jim's head and he saw the beauty in the world around him in Nebraska and Blackhawk and even in his school. And then he connected the two. He said, I see these beautiful women and I appreciate that beauty in them. And I love experiencing that, even if I'm not a part of it. And he can, like Vince, you said, he personifies the trees. He connects himself to birds flying off in the sunset. So he is like so creative in how he describes his experiences. So that's what I took away from the book. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, and oh, yeah.
No,
This is
go.
one final thing. um, the really cool, like you said, we are able to connect with some of these people too. Like we're inside, like what their perspective is like. And what's really cool is that this is sort of like the themes of growing up, coming of age, you know. He lived in the farm, he grew up when he moved to the town, and this is how he changed and how different people can change. What's really interesting for me was that I used to live in the rural area in the farms as well. And when I migrated here to America, we moved out of the rural and into a town or like suburbs. And the difference in social life, it's very different. And people have to adapt to that sort of thing. And it was just really cool how I could connect to that.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I haven't had that experience, but I'd be sort of like Jim in that I don't have that experience. I could just adapt to the best that I needed to. But you're saying you connected to Antonia more or who? Just the story
I
as a
guess a bit of both, just a bit of
whole.
both. I kind of miss I too have that nostalgic feeling, you know, missing childhood days, that sort of thing.
Thank you. That's awesome. I love that we ended on that note. Well, I've been Sydney. I've been here with Stephanie, Juliana, and Vince, and we were discussing prompt 5. So thank you. And I'm going to be stopping the recording now.